My Bones Will Feed the Deep by Jordan Long. 1942. When I was a boy, we were very poor. Destitute, even. Father's feet had been severed in an industrial accident, and while at first the factory said they would care for us, the cupboards eventually became empty. Strange things happen to a house full of children when there is no heat, no light, and pipes that continue to burst each time the temperature dropped below zero. Water has always ruled me, even then. Even on the second floor, we could smell the rot and mildew of the wood coming from the first floor. And at night, I dreamt of the frame of the house finally giving way and crashing down on us. Some nights, that was a good dream, if the hunger had went on long enough. Then the mold came, creeping black death in the corners and climbing up the walls. It floated through the air like dust motes, clogging my throat with musk and decay. And then, right before they took us all away for the orphanage, came the moss, bright and brilliant green, like a mockery of the gray-brown hell our life had become. Sometimes, the hunger was so terrible, we would eat it. It tasted the way death smelled, like the stench from the cat that had died under the porch one summer, and the foulest of dirt. But the moss filled our bellies, and that was enough. I wonder if that moss somehow crawled into my brain and made me deranged, because that was certainly the adjective used to describe me throughout my life. At the orphanages, the nuns would say it before they slapped my knuckles with a ruler, punishing me for acting out. But later, when I joined the Navy, my superiors would say it with a hint of awe. They said I had no fear, and when you are selling yourself to your country to potentially die, a lack of fear is a beautiful thing to have. At first, I didn't think I would be able to be a diver. I wasn't claustrophobic or afraid of the crushing depths of the ocean, but that wetsuit they gave me, it smelled like mildew. They gave me peppermint oil, and with enough of it rubbed in my nostrils, the mildew smell would finally be undetectable, which was perfect. A diver with no fear was a valuable asset. Truthfully, I only joined the military because I was told they would house and feed me for as long as I was a capable soldier. It was only later that my affinity for the cold, dark, and terrifying places was discovered. I was a damned good soldier, but I was still convinced some part of my brain had been eaten away. There was a war going on, but I paid little attention. War or no war, I was given food and clean sheets, all for occasionally being dropped into the deep. I rarely thought about the rotting house these days, especially on mornings like this, standing on the deck of the ship with the entire world spreading out around me. It seemed millions of miles away from those crumbling walls. I was the only one in good spirits today, though. Everyone was incredibly serious, tense in a way that made it clear they were on the precipice of something incredibly important, and it rested on my shoulders. I had been drilled over and over again on what I was to retrieve today, and shown so many pictures I felt like I was going cross-eyed. From the wreckage of a sunken German U-boat, I was to bring back a code-breaking machine. "This could change the tide for us, son. You would be a hero," my commander had said. But I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't mind going down anyway. I had very little opinion on what I was used for. As the crane lowered me into the water, I could feel the muted cold of the ocean through the suit, everywhere but my head that was covered by the copper helmet. I watched the bubbles float above me and to the surface, and waited. There was one thing I had been warned about that gave me a bit of pause. The The Type 2 U-boat had only sunk 2 days prior, and the bodies of the German sailors would still be present. I don't think it will bother me, but red, painful memories of the stumps of my father's ankles and his corpse-like face flashed across my consciousness, and it made me shiver. I breathed through it, closing my eyes, the scent of peppermint clearing my mind. There wasn't much to see this far down, just the pale cone of light from my flashlight and the occasional creature that passed through it. But once my weighted boots touched the sand, I could immediately see the wreckage. I had been told the machine would be towards the front of the U-boat, so I lifted my foot and began the arduous task of walking forward. Reality was small here. Peppermint, the cone of light, the cool air from the umbilical on my scalp, and the sound of my boots in the sand. I continued forward until I hit something horribly soft with my left foot. Bending at the waist was difficult, so I took a few steps and aimed the flashlight down. The corpse looked different than I expected. Gray-white, bloated, and I had to suppress a gag. Their face being picked at by dozens of small crabs. At least he served a purpose. The man is dead, but the crabs aren't. At least they won't go hungry. Not frightening, but utterly disgusting. I stepped around the fallen German, dutifully ignoring the other soft, humped shapes among the jagged metal. There was no reason to use the dive phone. They had warned me, after all, and it wasn't as if they could reply. It was a one-way communicator, only used to signal to bring me up. Every step stirs up the silt around me, and it's so overwhelmingly silent besides my footsteps that I can even hear the air coming through the umbilical, an ever-present hiss. I sweep my light over everything. Broken hole, part of a living quarter, another body. The crabs, who, thank God, aren't starving. Wires waving lazily in the current. A Type 2 U-boat isn't a massive vessel, and as the minutes ticked by, I began to feel more and more certain that the machine isn't here. Even if it was, how would it still be intact? One unfortunate part of diving is that the only thing I can rely on is my deranged mind. There was no normal person to check with, but for the most part, I'm capable. I barely notice the chill or the heaviness of the water, or even the idea that less than an inch of metal separates me from certain death. So I just walk and sweep the light. Walk and sweep the light. And simply search. It's not here. I know it's not. I've been under too long. The peppermint oil is fading, and there is a single note of musk coming through. I'll just check one more time. It seems so important, and if I didn't find it, would they stop feeding me? They wouldn't. Would they? Would they let me starve? What if they won't bring me up until I have the machine? I would never eat again. My last sweep of the U-boat is more frantic, and I'm being careless, not avoiding sharp edges or skirting around the bodies where they perpetually rocked in the current for the rest of their existence. Bottle, periscope, ammunition, a pair of severed feet, more pieces of the hull. It's not here. My peppermint oil is all but gone, and the inside of my helmet reeks of dusty rot. Acid burns in my throat, but I can't vomit in the helmet, so I hold it down, looking. I turn over everything I can get my unwieldy fingers of my gloves around, looking underneath, eventually yanking my dive knife from the hip and cutting open anything that would part under the blade. From the outside, it must look like I'm moving in slow motion, but it's only the water and the suit impeding my movement. Finally, I stand over the body of a German sailor, hysteria riding me hard. It smells so fucking bad. I'd do anything to escape. I wanted to see the sun. I wanted to eat my rations. I've never intentionally hurt another person, so when I sunk the dive knife into the chest of the dead soldier, I was shocked at how little resistance there was. I was sure the machine wasn't inside of him, but I had checked everywhere else. I had to be sure. His shirt and flesh parted beneath my gloves like silk, and his insides were as pale gray-white as the rest of his body. Intestines were floating up around me, bumping against my mask like fat, ivory eels. There was nothing in him but meat, damn it. At least the crabs could eat. The next corpse was the same, except I slipped the waterlogged picture of a woman and kids I found in his pocket under his flaking fingers before moving on. Ugh, the stench in my helmet was almost unbearable, and I readied to call the surface when I spotted yet another corpse and hesitated. At this point, I didn't think the machine was in any of the bodies, and I was ready to give up. But there was something different about this body that drew me forward like a snake to a charmer. Up close, he really did look different. This German's skin was pink, his lips barely cyanotic, and his milky eyes wide open. There were no crabs. He seemed almost alive. I was deranged, but some animalistic reptilian part of my mind was screaming, shaking the bars of its cage in a panic at the sight of this body. The terror in this part of me was white hot, trying to flee this body, like a memory, buried in my very bones, recognized this danger. But the smell of this helmet overrode it all. The longer I waited, the more the surrounding steel melted away into pieces of moldy oak. I had to focus. The diving knife had more trouble breaking this body's skin, but once that layer was pierced, the knife bottomed out, almost immediately, as if the body was hollow. If it was hollow, something could be hidden within. Those milky eyes watched the entire time as I drug the knife down the torso and greedily stuck my gloved hands into the cleft, pulling and pulling. There was no flesh inside of him, no heart, no lungs, and no ropey guts. Instead, he was full of moss, as green and full of health as if it had been grown next to a temperate stream. There was so much that it seemed to pour out of him where I had cut, even as my legs gave out and I fell back onto my ass. I couldn't stop gagging now, my mouth full of dirt, decay, rot, and mold. But something was still calling me towards the moss-filled corpse. Deep in the empty chest cavity, something glowed, orange-red and impossible to resist. With shaking hands, I picked up the flashlight I had laid next to the body while I worked and shined it on the corpse. It didn't change, except for the moss becoming greener and even more verdant. The glow pulsed like a heart inside. That animal inside me was screaming. I was heaving, but I dropped the light again and plunged my hands into the moss, digging until I found that pseudo-heart and pulled it free squinting through the tears in my eyes to see what it really was, burning hot even through my gloves. The light of it was reflecting off my helmet as I drew it closer to my face. It was oval, smooth like an egg, and beating with furious, beautiful life. I could see a silhouette of something through the membrane, shifting and curling around itself, fluid and monstrous and perfect. A tangle of so many tentacles. I had never wanted children, not after what happened to me as a boy. But I think the emotion that rushed through me when I held the egg was something like the bond of a parent to a child. I loved it. And no matter how my instincts howled, I wanted to protect it, guard it. It was so small. It was then I heard the voice, crawling across my brain like a spider. I'm so hungry. I froze, bringing the egg even closer, listening. I'm so hungry. I'm so cold. Please hold me. Hold me. I sobbed between gags, my soul aching with the sorrow in the voice. It was calling to me. The only thing it had in the entire world. It needed me, or this brilliant light would go dark. Against your body. Against your body, it whispered. I held the egg with one hand, the other picking up my dive knife from the sand of the ocean floor. First, I saw through the umbilical on the top of my helmet, hearing the safety valve where it connected to the helmet slamming shut at the first breach, cutting until finally I was free. I was shaking so hard now. Lowering the knife to my stomach, a little voice continued to whisper, I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry. But finally, I pierced the thick rubber of my suit. The pressure punching into me with such force, I knew I would die long before I drowned. But with the last bit of life within me, I crammed the egg through the gash, pressing it against my body, even as the pressure obliterated my ribs, cracking them to dust. The egg glowed with ferocious life, burrowing into me, and at last it did not hunger. And there, in the frozen darkness, neither did I. (2020) Low background steel, made before the detonation of the atom bomb, was becoming harder and harder to find, dredged up from the wreckage of ships sunken long ago. Delicate medical devices, Geiger counters, and dozens of other pieces of machinery required this metal. So when the carcass of a sunken U-boat was found, a collection ship was dispatched immediately. The U-boat was a sort of mystery, unmarked and never mentioned in the lists of casualties from World War II, but these details weren't important. The only thing that mattered was the low background steel. It was a difficult undertaking to bring it up, but the worth of it was unparalleled. The sun had set hours ago, when one deckhand yelled for another to come and see what had been dredged up. An antique, standard diving dress suit, nearly completely intact, the window of the helmet hauntingly empty. There was no one else on deck, and the two young men looked at each other with wide eyes. "You think there's a body in it?" one asked. The other poked a finger into the obvious cut in the suit, and when he discovered it went all the way through, he pulled the rubber sides apart to see what secrets were inside. It wasn't the remains of an unfortunate Navy diver he found, though. No, but it's full of moss. Wait," the man said, an orange-red glow reflecting in his eyes.